and change the host, and then I will be back shortly to go ahead and give you the all clear to start.
Understood.
This round can go ahead and begin. Thank you for your patience.
Okay, thanks. We just received the message to get started. Let's call the case of the estates of Genesis Petrillo v. Peony Estates and Harper Martini. My name is Judge John Wersgala. Scoring judge, please look to the 2 buttons on the lower left of your screen and remember to keep your audio and video off unless you're told otherwise. You should also have your video set to hide all non-video participants. This means the only people on the screen right now should be the advocates and me. Can the attorneys please make appearances? Do plaintiff's attorneys want to introduce themselves?
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Bryce Tonkin, and I'm a middle attorney for the plaintiff.
Your Honor, my name is Luke Teradista, and I, along with my co-counsel, Dima Balut
Good morning, Your Honor.
and
Morning.
Bryce Tonkin.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Defense counsel, I'm sorry, defense counsel, do you want to introduce yourselves? I think you're on mute.
Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you now.
Oh, sorry about that. Whew. Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Brandon Pack, and I, along with my co-counsel, Veda Sai.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
And Kim Chappell.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Are there any pretrial matters to discuss?
Yes, Your Honor. We'd like to note for the court today that today's negligence per se case is bifurcated, meaning that today's proceedings deal solely with the issue of liability, that is, which party is more responsible for the damages incurred. The actual amount of those damages will be determined at a separate date. Your Honor, we'd also like to turn your attention to stipulation 3, which states that exhibits 1 through 10 are pre-admitted. Both parties further stipulate that all pre-admitted exhibits may be used or referred to during our opening statements.
Okay, anything else?
Yes, Your Honor. Finally, the plaintiff would like to invoke Rule 615, the constructive sequestration of all witnesses.
The rule is invoked.
With that, Your Honor, the plaintiff is ready to proceed.
Anything from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. We would also like to invoke Rule 603, which states that all witnesses have been pre-sworn in prior to trial.
The rule's been invoked for both sides.
Your Honor, what are your preferences in screen sharing, exhibits, demonstratives, and so forth?
When you screen share, just for the purposes of the record, state what you're sharing. If something's been pre-admitted, go ahead and say that it's been pre-admitted. If you're showing a witness that hasn't been pre-admitted, just state that you're showing the witness what has been pre-marked as whatever exhibit that is. And then if it hasn't been pre-admitted, upon going through it with the witness, then you can offer it for admission.
And are we free to construct and deconstruct demonstrative aids during our direct examinations?
Yes. Anything else?
No, I believe with that, the defense is ready to proceed.
Okay, we will now hear opening statements from each party. Everyone should make sure they are in speaker view. That button is in the upper right of your screen. Attorneys, please remember to mute your audio when the other attorney is speaking. With that, the plaintiff can open.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
May it please the court, opposing counsel, members of the jury. Profits over people. Members of the jury, when you go to a restaurant and drink a glass of wine or eat a plate of food, you take some things for granted. You take for granted that the plate that you're eating from was cleaned. You take for granted that there are no bugs or pesticides in the drink you're having. You take for granted that the people serving you don't put profits over people. And when you can't take those things for granted, you know there's a problem. That is why we are here today. I want to take you back to June 7th, 2019. Now, that wasn't any day. It was the wedding day of the plaintiff, Genesis Petrillo. Her and her fiancé, Casey Soto, were planning to celebrate like all other couples do, with a night of good food, good people, and good drinks at Peony Estates, a winery. But then, something tragic happened. On the night of her wedding reception, Miss Petrillo drank a bottle of wine, a Cara 2019 bottle. And within hours, she was dead. Members of the jury, it's not an issue today who made that wine, bottled that wine, and served that wine. It's a defendant, Peony Estates. And it's because they served that wine, and it's because they put profits over people that we are here today. Peony Estates has been sued for negligence. And as a part of this charge, we, the plaintiff, have the burden of proving to you three things. One, that the defendant, Peony Estates, violated a health and safety law, specifically Section 12100 of the Midlands Building Code. Two, that Peony Estates' violations harmed Genesis Petrillo. And three, that Genesis Petrillo is a consumer of the wine, which neither party disputes in today's case. We have the burden of proving to you these things by a preponderance of the evidence, meaning we must establish that the elements are more likely than not true. And to show you how the plaintiff will do this, we ask you to pay attention to three major issues: the procedures, the profits, and the personnel. First, you'll hear about the procedures. You'll hear from Adkins O'Keefe, the health inspector who's licensed here in Midlands, that she went to inspect Peony Estates not once, not twice, but 3 separate times. You will hear from her that at her last inspection of Peony Estates on May 8th, 2019, just a month before the wedding, she found 4 major health code violations in the bottling area where the Cara wine bottle was stored. The wine bottle that killed Genesis Petrillo. Second, you'll hear about the profits. You'll hear from Lonnie Paris, an investigative journalist, that Peony Estates was experiencing serious infestation problems that were cutting into their profits. You'll hear how, because of this, the employees were asked to prepare the winery for a chemical pesticide spraying. And they were told to do this quickly and cheaply. You will learn that they were told that nothing else matters. Lastly, you'll hear about the personnel. You'll hear from Adkins O'Keefe that she spoke to employees who did not understand the importance of keeping the wine away from pesticides. You'll also hear from Danny Francasio, a winery owner himself, that Harper Martini did not understand how deadly pesticides were, and she had to consult Mr. Francasio to know about basic procedure. Members of the jury, we are confident that when you hear about the procedures and the personnel of Peony Estates, you will be convinced that they put profits over people. And as a cause of this negligence, Genesis Petrillo died. And so at the end of the trial, my co-counsel, Luke Teradista, will ask you to deliver the only fair and just verdict: liable. Thank you.
Defense, are you ready to open?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
In pain and looking to blame. Today, we, the defense, are representing Peony Estates in the cause of action of negligence per se. Peony Estates was built by the hard work of 2 people, Austin Lewis and Harper Martini. Both Miss Lewis and Miss Martini took the necessary steps to ensure that their business could be the best business in Midlands. They didn't do this by, as the plaintiff would have you believe, putting profits over people. They They did this by following every step. They did this by not cutting corners. They did this by being the best that they could be. While the loss of Genesis Petrillo is a tragedy, we must not allow the pain from that tragedy to blind us and push us towards blaming innocent parties. There are 4 elements to negligence per se. First, the plaintiff must prove that the defendant had violated a law or statute. Then the plaintiff must prove that that law violated had to do with safety. The violation of that law must have been the direct cause of Genesis Petrillo's death. And finally, that Genesis Petrillo was supposed to be protected by this law. The plaintiff must prove each of these elements by the preponderance of the evidence, or more likely than not. In today's case, the plaintiff holds the burden, but what they didn't tell you is we don't have any burden at all as the defense. Imagine, if you would, the scales of justice. These scales do not start off equal. Rather, the defense has no burden in today's round, and the plaintiff must prove each of their elements using evidence, facts, and exhibits in order to get to 50% and a grain of salt. If they do not reach 50% and a grain of salt more, then the defendant is not liable in today's case. And while we, the defense, have no burden, we will bring forth 3 witnesses in today's trial. First, you will hear from an expert toxicologist who will talk to you about the other possibilities of Genesis Petrillo's death. Then you will hear from the event planner of the wedding who will speak to you about how Peony Estates always went above and beyond her expectations for safety. And finally, you will hear from the head winemaker of Peony Estates who will tell you about how Peony Estates was looking forward to making their place as good as possible, perfect as possible. While they were imperfect by many means, it is important to note that they were moving towards perfection. They took recommendations and they were ready to move forward. The loss of Petrillo was a travesty, but a travesty is not the same thing as negligence. We should not allow the pain of losing Genesis Petrillo to blind us. At the end of today's trial, my co-counsel, Ms. Tsai, will ask you to see the elements of negligence per se that is missing. We'll ask you to see the elements of negligence per se that was not touched by the plaintiff's case. And we will ask you to find our client, Peony Estates, not liable for negligence.
Okay, thank you. We're now going to start opening statements. Before the plaintiff calls its first witness, I'll ask everyone to switch to gallery view. That button is in the upper right of your screen. This will allow you to see the attorney and the witness at the same time. Is plaintiff ready to proceed with their first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Danny Francasio to the stand.
You may proceed.
Please state your name for the court.
My name is Danny Francasio.
And Mr. Francasio, what do you do for a living?
I own and operate Rose and Pedro Winery, the premier wine establishment in all of Rapid River Valley, and I worked hard to get there.
And can you briefly explain your background in wine production for the jury?
Yes, sir. I was born for the wine business, and I pursued it with a laser focus. I graduated with a BS in biology from Boston College with a focus on the science of fruit-based fermentation, and got my MBA from Duke to learn how to turn a profit, which arguably I knew how to do since I was a teenager selling lemonade off the street.
Now, Mr. Francasio, how exactly are you involved in today's case?
The defendant, or the person that owns Peony Estates, Harper Martini, used to work for me as a cellar hand.
And what exactly does a cellar hand do?
Well, a cellar hand is in charge of all sorts of things, like monitoring the wine's environment, and also monitoring the amount of pests inside the cellar. When Mr. Martini was working with me, I explicitly went over all the precautions and dangers when dealing with pesticides around wine.
Why were you so cautious?
Well, if pesticides aren't applied properly, it can get into the wine, which is extremely dangerous for anybody who drinks it. It's not just common sense or good business, it's the law. It's part of the basics of the wine business, and any wine owner worth his salt knows the rules.
Now, what exactly was your relationship like with Miss Harper Martini?
Well, when Miss Martini was working for me, she was not just an employee, but was also a good close friend.
And how did your relationship progress after you employed her?
Well, eventually Miss Martini decided to open up her own winery, Peony Estates, which honestly at the time did make me a little upset because I thought that she was family and it did hurt my business a little bit. And since then, we have not been nearly as close.
Have you spoken to her since then?
Yes, sir. She emailed me over a year after she started Peony Estates. She's been emailing regularly since then for some advice here and there.
What kind of advice has she reached out about?
Well, mostly Miss Martini has reached out for me for help dealing with pests inside her winery and how to establish safety procedures for dealing with pesticides.
Now, would you recognize a copy of this email that she sent you?
Yes, sir, I would.
Your Honor, let the record reflect that I'm showing the witness Exhibit 13.
Good.
What are we looking at here, Mr. Francazia?
This is that first email that Miss Martini sent me asking for advice.
Is it a fair and accurate copy?
It seems to be a fair and accurate copy. Yes, sir.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
No, sir, it doesn't seem to.
Your Honor, the plaintiff offers Exhibit 13 into evidence.
Defense, any response?
Yes, Your Honor, I have an objection to improper character evidence.
Plaintiff?
Response, Your Honor?
Yes.
I'd like to direct your attention to case law, Midlands case law, Tenafong v. Cruz. If you'd like, I can show that on the screen for you. Your Honor, would you like me to show the?
Oh, yes, please.
Okay. All right. Your Honor, here at the bottom of Tenafong v. Cruz, it says here that evidence related to a business's prior compliance with or deviation from a pattern or practice when that pattern or practice is the subject of a negligence claim is not admissible character evidence.
Your Honor, may I respond to that?
You may.
There has been no prior practice or pattern that has been established with that email. It simply states that back in 2016, Harper Martini talking about needing advice with how to handle pesticides. This case law states that there has to be some sort of practice or pattern that needs to be established first.
Go back to the email, please.
Response to that, Your Honor?
You can respond.
Yeah, we're exactly doing that. We're establishing a pattern right now, which is what the case law instructs us to do. We are establishing a pattern of noncompliance with a rule, and then later on establishing that Harper Martini and Peony Estates followed that pattern of not complying with the rules. Therefore, it is in compliance with Tenafong v. Cruz.
Your Honor, may I respond to that?
You may.
This email, the contents of this email indicate that this was a single instance of Harper Martini having trouble with pests in his cellar. Furthermore, there's been no compliance. They did not establish non-compliance, and therefore opposing counsel is using this for conformity therewith to show that because Harper Martini did not know how to handle pests in the past, back in 2016, Harper Martini did not know how to handle pests in 2019.
I'm going to overrule the objection. Exhibit 13 is admitted. You can proceed.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Francazio, when did Harper send this to you?
Well, as you can see right here at the top, it says August 26, 2016.
And do you know what Harper reached out to you for?
Well, he says right here, she says right here in the second paragraph that she was having some trouble with pests in Peony Estates wine cellar and needed my advice on how to get rid of them.
Now, how did you respond to that?
Well, actually, at first, I didn't. Harper was my competitor at the time, and I didn't feel like it was my job to help a rival winery with their business. Eventually, though, my fear for his customers and just people in general overrode my business instincts.
What do you mean your fear for his customers and overrode your business instincts?
Well, she kept emailing me about how desperate she was to fix her pest problem, and I was worried that she would fail to use the proper procedures and end up hurting one of her customers. I felt at that point it was my duty to ensure the safety of the people drinking her wine, despite their poor choice in winery. I had to make sure Harper was going profits over people, not taking people over profits. Excuse me.
Now, other than giving Harper advice, did you do anything else to protect the customers at Peony Estates?
Yes, sir. I gave a tip to Lonnie Pears, who's a local investigative journalist here in Midlands. I hoped that he could take a look at Peony Estates pesticide handling procedures to make sure that nobody would get hurt when drinking their wine. I felt like it was the right thing to do at the time.
Did you ever personally report a health code violation to the authorities?
No, sir. I never reported a violation to the authorities personally, but I did help somebody else submit a report.
Who did you help?
I told Genesis Petrillo how to submit one back in 2018 after she asked me how to do it.
Now, did Harper ask for any more advice on dealing with pesticides?
Yes, sir. She actually emailed me again, and this is where it started to get a little bit more scary for me.
Will you recognize a copy of that email chain?
Yes, sir, I would.
I'll let the record reflect, Your Honor, that I'm showing the witness pre-marked Exhibit 17.
The record will so reflect.
What have I showed you here, Mr. Francasio?
This appears to be another part of that email chain.
Is it a fair and accurate copy?
Yes, sir, it is.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
Not from what I can tell, sir.
Your Honor, the plaintiff offers Exhibit 17 into evidence.
Defense response.
Yes, Your Honor. I would like to object to hearsay. These email statements are an out-of-court document being offered for the truth of the matter asserted.
I'm going to overrule that objection. Plaintiff, continue.
Yes, Your Honor. What was so concerning to you about this email chain, Mr. Francasio?
Well, if you look here on the second page, you can see that in her first email, she told me that Peony Estates had failed an official Midlands Health Code inspection and that his daughter's wedding was just around the corner.
Now, do you know when Miss Martini's daughter's wedding was?
I knew that Casey and Genesis were supposed to get married on June 8th because they had sent me an invitation to it a little while back.
And when did Harper send this email?
Well, you see, on May 12th of 2019, that was what was so scary to me. Not only because the wedding was less than a month away, but because it had been 3 years since Harper started first emailing me for help about using pesticides. How can someone still not know how to use pesticides safely after 3 years of my advice?
Now, what made you think that Harper still didn't know how to use pesticides safely?
Well, you'll see in her next email at the top of the page, she told me that she was having trouble storing her pesticides safely and that her personnel didn't want to follow proper procedures.
Objection.
So
Improper character evidence may be heard, Your Honor.
Yes, you may.
Once again, these email statements go, opposing counsel is trying to establish that these prior instances of Harper Martini not knowing how to handle pesticides, for instance, just because she didn't know how to do it at the time, she also did not know how to handle pesticides on the day of the wedding. Opposing counsel is using this to show conformity therewith.
Response, Your Honor.
You proceed.
In this email, we're showing that a month before the wedding, a winery owner didn't know how to use pesticides safely. That directly affect the day in question. Wine takes months to create, to bottle, and to produce. And this would directly affect the wine given at the party, and therefore it is directly relevant to the day in question, not just in terms of conformity therewith.
Okay, I'm going to overrule the objection. And I believe earlier you offered this and I did not admit it. So I'm going to go ahead and admit that this into evidence now.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Proceed.
Now, Mr. Francasio, why exactly is it so important to store pesticides safely?
Well, if pesticides aren't stored properly, they could get into the wine. and potentially hurt or even kill the person that decides to drink it. Listen, I get that in business, we want to find things that cut corners, find the cheapest alternative. But when it comes to pesticides, literal poison, you just have to put people over your own profits.
Nothing further at this time, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. May I begin?
You may.
Mr. Francazio, you've never seen the pesticide storage at Peony Estates,
No, not personally.
and you've never seen the bottling area either.
No, I haven't seen it personally.
You also have not seen the wine cellar storage.
I've never seen a wine cellar storage. I have my own wine cellar storage. Or which one are you referring to?
The wine cellar storage at Peony Estates.
No,
You've
I have
never-
never seen wine cellar storage at Peony Estates.
And that's because you've never actually been to Peony Estates.
No, sir, I don't make it a habit of going to my competitors.
Mr. Francazio, I'm going to talk about some of the emails. Now, you gave advice to Mr. Martini,
Yes, I did on several occasions over a span of 3 years.
and it was about treating pests,
Yes, sir.
about pesticide storage,
Yes, sir.
but you don't know whether or not she followed your advice.
Exactly, I don't. But I would assume if you keep on asking for advice, then probably you're not doing something right.
Now, Mr. Francazio, you own your own winery, right?
That is correct, sir.
Called Rosie and Pedro's,
Yes, sir. Named after my 2 little doggos.
and you hired Harper Martini
Yes, I did.
as a cellar hand,
Yes, sir.
and that was back in 2012.
Yes, sir.
Now, Ms. Martini had a responsibility to ensure that the wine cellar was free of pests.
Yes, sir. She was one of the people responsible for it.
But during that time, to your knowledge, no one got sick from your wine.
No, sir, because I also oversaw the operation and I made sure that not only her as a cellar hand, but other cellar hands follow proper procedure.
Mr. Francazio, so just for the record, that is a no to my question. No one got sick from your wine,
No, sir, because we follow procedure.
and no one died from your wine either.
No, sir, because we follow procedure.
Now, later, you promoted Harper Martini
Yes, sir, I did.
to vineyard manager,
Yes, sir.
and that was back in 2014.
Yes, sir.
And you would say that Harper Martini exceeded all expectations.
Yes, sir. Back then, she was following the procedures that I laid out for her, and the other cellar hands were also following it as well.
And she got along great with staff
Yes, sir. That's why
and guests,
Sorry?
and guests as well.
Objection, Your Honor, to relevance.
Response?
I'm simply trying to establish that when Harper Martini worked for Mr. Francazio, that she helped the business out.
I'm going to overrule the objection. You may continue.
Mr. Francazio, Harper Martini also found ways to make your winery more profitable.
Yes, sir, she did. That's what I was paying her to do.
And during that time, to your knowledge, no one got sick from your wine.
Again, no one has ever gotten sick from my wine in any way, shape, or form.
And no one died from your wine either.
No, sir, because my winery follows all procedures and we've never failed an FDA inspection.
Now, Mr. Francazio, you are aware that Harper started his own winery
Yes, sir, I am.
called the Peony Estates.
Yes, that's the name of it.
And you lost half of your senior staff.
Yes, sir, I did.
You also had to take a pay cut.
Yes, sir, it was only 25%. It was just to make sure I didn't have to lay anybody off. We're only an acre large, so we don't have
Mr. Francazio, so just for the record, that is a yes, you had to take a pay cut.
I said yes, and then I told you how much of the pay cut I took.
And the Peony Estates was ranked #1 winery.
I'm sorry.
The Peony Estates was the ranked #1 winery.
Well, it depends on who you ask. You're gonna have to be more specific on who they're ranked one. by.
According to the magazine in Midlands, they were ranked #1.
Yes, one magazine ranked them #1, but if you ask any
And
real wine customer in Midland, they'll tell you that it's mine.
and your winery was ranked #2.
In that specific magazine, yes.
So Peony Estates is your competitor.
Well, yes, sir, that's how business works. We both make wine.
Now, Mr. Francasio, you stated something early on direct examination, and I even wrote it down. You stated that you feared for the customers at Peonia Estates, right?
Yes, sir, I did. They could have been drinking poison.
So you immediately contacted the FDA, right?
No, I didn't, but I
Oh.
informed Genesis Petrillo on how to do that.
Mr. Francasio, you called the police, right?
No, I didn't, but I informed Genesis Petrillo on how to.
So you just sent a tip to an investigative journalist.
I didn't just send a tip. I gave advice on proper procedure, and I also informed Genesis Petrillo.
Mr. Francasio, but directing you back to my question, you sent a tip.
Sorry, was that an objection?
Yes, Your Honor. Objection. I just asked that the witness is allowed to answer the question in full.
May I respond to that, Your Honor?
Okay.
My question was, you sent a tip to an investigative reporter. This simply elicits a yes or no answer.
I'm going to overrule the objection. Defense can continue.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Mr. Francasio, you just sent a tip to an investigative journalist, yes or no?
No, I didn't just do that.
But that is something that you did, though, right?
Yeah, that's one of the several things that I did. Yes, sir.
No further questions.
Redirect.
No, Your Honor. All I ask is the witness be able to step down.
The witness is excused. The plaintiff can call their next witness.
Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Lonnie Paris. May we proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Please state your name for the jury.
Hi, my name is Lonnie Paris.
And what do you do for a living, Miss Paris?
I'm a journalist by trade, but an environmentalist at heart.
Now, how did you get into this work?
Well, I worked for Blitz News Network, BNN, specializing in both investigative and undercover journalism. It was my job to expose corporate America's dark secrets, especially those threatening our planet.
Are you familiar with the winery Peonia Estates?
Why, yes, I am.
How did you get involved with Peonia Estates?
Well, I got involved with them when I first began investigating Peonia Estates based on a tip from Danny Francasio, the owner of a rival business, Rosie and Pedro. This is what led me to secretly investigate Peonia Estates' pest problem by taking repeated tours of the winery and inspecting the extent of pesticide misuse.
Now, how did you begin your investigation?
I began by researching Peonia Estates on the web and noticed that the winery is located right next to a swamp. The first time I visited Peonia Estates, I stopped for gas on the way, and I was eaten alive by insects. I mean, they were seriously vicious. And if I've learned one thing from my line of work, it's that with pests comes pesticides. They're awful for water pollution.
Objection and proper opinion.
Response, Your Honor?
Response.
The witness is merely speaking to her own personal experience with bugs near the winery. Given her direct experience, which has been documented in her sworn affidavit, which she gave, and the sufficient evidence that she's laid out to support her knowledge of the issues of pests near Peonia Estates, it meets the standards for proper opinion and personal knowledge.
I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Please continue.
What did you do next?
I went on a tour at Peonia Estates to get a look around inside.
Was there a tour guide?
Yes, his name is Drew Matsukas.
Did you meet anyone else on your visit?
Yeah, I met the sommelier, Nat Ludmer, Austin Lewis, the head winemaker, and a few other employees.
What did the tour guide tell you?
Well, he explained that the winery only harvests its grapes once per year and would use the grapes to make their wine for the next year.
Objection, hearsay. May I be heard?
You may.
This is an out-of-court statement being offered for the truth of the matter today. The statement that the wine is produced every year does not is not being produced by Lonnie Paris, therefore should not be accepted in today's trial, but instead should be brought forward by a different witness.
Response, Your Honor?
You may respond.
Under Rule 801D2, this is admission by a party opponent. Mr. Matsukas, being a tour guide at Peonia Estates, is an employee and an agent of the defense, therefore.
Response.
Yes, Your Honor. Then I would like to revise my objection to one of relevance. If this is simply just a offhanded remark made by a simple member of Peony Estates, and this doesn't bear on today's round. It doesn't make any of the facts of today's round more or less probable, especially since this is coming from a tour guide and not from a member of the wine production team.
Response, Your Honor.
Okay.
The issue in today's case is due to the wine, and the manner in which the grapes are harvested and the time frame in which they are harvested is of great issue in today's case. Furthermore, this particular instance also goes to lay the foundation for Ms. Paris's understanding of the winery and its inner workings.
I'm going to overrule the objection. You can continue.
Yes, Your Honor. Would you like me to re-ask the question, Ms. Paris?
Yes, please.
What did the tour guide tell you?
Well, like I was saying, he was explaining that the winery only harvests its grapes once per year and would use the grapes to make their wine for the next year. So, for example, the wine made in 2019 uses grapes harvested in 2018.
Was this the only time you visited Peony Estates?
No, I visited Peony Estates multiple times.
How did you approach your second visit?
Well, my second visit took place sometime in July, I believe it was 2018. During the tour itself, I lagged behind the group and managed to sneak into one of the restricted rooms.
What room did you enter?
The bottling room.
What did you see when you entered the bottling room?
I found quite a few empty bottles of pesticide, all labeled with one brand, Bug Off, scattered across the back of the bottling area. I knew I needed more information at this point, so I looked for some sort of office. I saw an office door labeled Harper Martini, so I walked in.
What did you see in Harper Martini's office?
It was extremely disorganized. I mean, I saw piles upon piles of paperwork, and that's where I found a memo written by Austin Lewis, the head winemaker at Peony Estates.
Did you read the memo?
Yes.
Your Honor, permission to show the witness what has been previously marked as Exhibit 12.
You may.
Ms. Paris, what have I just shown you?
This is the memo I found in Harper Martini's office.
Is it a fair and accurate copy?
Yes.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
No.
Your Honor, permission to enter Exhibit 12 into evidence.
Response by the defense.
No objection at this time.
Exhibit 12 is admitted.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Paris, who sent this memo according to the document?
Austin Lewis of Peony Estates.
What stood out to you from the memo?
Well, according to the memo, an infestation had forced Peony Estates to throw out nearly a quarter of its wine stocks, lowering their profit projections for 2019 by nearly 30%. Austin says that they need to escalate their response through a quick and cheap pesticide spraying, and that nothing else matters.
Now, after finding this memo, did you visit Peony Estates again?
Yes, I returned sometime, I believe it was early May.
And what happened when you visited on May 6th?
I heard an employee say that a health inspector was coming to inspect the 2019 wine on May 8th. I knew that finally this was my chance.
What did you see at the winery when you returned on May 8th?
Well, returning to the familiar restricted areas, I immediately noticed that all of the canisters of pesticide I had seen before were gone, vanished. The place was spotless. I also saw a full bottle of Cara wine sitting alone on a shelf.
Your Honor, permission to show the witness what has been previously marked as Exhibits 2A and 2B. Pursuant to Stipulation 3, both exhibits have already been entered into evidence.
Okay.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Paris, what are we looking at here?
This is the bottle of wine and the label of the bottle that I saw on May 8th.
Did you see any other bottles with the same Cara label?
No, I only saw the one.
Did you see any other bottles at all?
No, the Cara bottle was sitting distinctly by itself.
Now, when did you next enter the bottling area?
I visited the bottling area again on June 7th, 2019, the date of the rehearsal and rehearsal dinner.
And what did you see in the bottling area at that time?
Well, in the bottling area, I found a single bottle of 2019 Cara sitting by itself on a nearby shelf.
Was this the where was this bottle of Cara? Sorry.
It was in the same location on the same shelf as when I saw it on May 8th.
And other than that bottle, was there anything else you saw?
Yes, something else caught my eye, an almost empty canister lying right next to the bottling station. The label was ripped off, but it looked exactly like the empty bug-off pesticide canisters that I had seen lying around back in 2018.
Now, following the death of Genesis Petrillo, did you continue your investigation into Peony Estates?
Yes, of course. I always do my due diligence as an investigative journalist.
How did you go about continuing this investigation?
Well, I kept visiting, of course, and had an interesting conversation with one of the sommeliers.
Now, do you know what happened to that Cara bottle of wine?
Yes, I saw a bottle that looked exactly like the one I had seen earlier being gifted to Genesis Petrillo on the night of the rehearsal dinner.
Do you know if the bottle you saw was the only bottle of Cara wine to ever be produced?
That's what one of the sommeliers, Nat Ludmer, confided in me. He told me that they had just started bottling Cara wine, and that 2019 was the first year that Peony Estates had planned to sell Cara wine. The bottle of Cara given to Genesis was the only bottle to ever be released to the public.
And do you know when Genesis Petrillo died?
Yes, it was the morning after I saw the same bottle of Cara wine being given to Genesis Petrillo.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Ross?
Ms. Paris, you started your investigation in 2018, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And during your initial investigation, you started by looking up regulations, correct?
Yes, I did a preliminary search on the web of Peony Estates.
But you have no formal education in health code.
Not specifically formal, but like I said, I did some investigating into that.
And you have never been certified by the FDA.
No, that's not my job. I'm an investigative journalist.
And you started your investigation by a tip, is that correct?
Yes, a tip from Danny Francasio that I found when looking through my BNN notes.
And Danny Francasio is a competitor of Peony Estates, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
This made you doubt the authenticity of that tip, correct?
We get a lot of tips from rival businesses, so I wanted to make sure and look into it a little bit more.
And you were laid off of your original job at BBC, correct?
It was BNN, but yeah, unfortunately, they had to let me go due to budgetary reasons.
And after that, you worked with companies.
Yes, that's correct.
You worked with companies to investigate their competitors, correct?
Yes, that's what I had to do at the time as a journalist.
And during the cross, you mentioned that you had seen empty canisters on your visit, the same visit you had seen during the Austin Lewis memo. Is that correct?
Yes, I saw a lot of empty canisters of pesticides scattered around.
Is that your testimony today?
Yes, it should be.
Permission to screen share what has been previously marked as the affidavit as the affidavit of Lonnie Paris. We'll specifically be looking at line 73.
You may.
Do you remember making an affidavit here today, Lonnie?
Yes.
Or Ms. Paris?
Yes, I do.
And you swore to tell the truth during this, right?
Yes.
And you included all relevant information.
Yes, I should have.
And you had until openings today to change it, correct?
Yes.
Is this your signature at the bottom of the page?
Yes, it is.
Now, looking at line 73, if you could please read it in your head while I read aloud. However, all of the canisters appeared to be new. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, that's correct.
So I'm going to be asking you again, where does this mention empty canisters?
I'm so sorry, that must have been on a different visit, but on this visit I did see canisters of pesticide that were new, I guess on another visit that I saw the empty ones.
All right. You may take down this affidavit. Now, you had also had you had access to a camera during your time at Peony Estates, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you had taken unrelated pictures at Peony Estates before.
Yes, I did.
You consider yourself a good reporter, correct?
Yes, that's correct. I like to think so.
You take all relevant notes.
Yes, of course.
And you take pictures of things that are important.
Yes.
However, you didn't take a picture of the empty canister you claim to have seen.
No, not at that time. It was going super quickly, so I popped in and out of that area.
And you had hidden bushes during the course of your investigation?
I had hidden bushes?
Yes.
Like I disguised myself in. Yes, I mean, as a journalist, you have to find means to get the truth of the story.
You had gone into restricted sections.
Yes.
You had even picked locks.
Yes, lockpicks aren't illegal in Midland, so.
And you did all of this with the hopes of getting getting an investigative job.
Yes, of course. I needed a story to showcase my work.
You had recently met with the editor of TBD magazine?
Yes, that's correct.
And you believe they want to see how much further you can take this story, correct?
Yeah, I think they want to see my journalistic skills really showcased.
No further questions.
Redirect.
No redirect, Your Honor. I just ask that the witness be allowed to step down.
The witness may be excused. You may call your next witness.
The plaintiff calls Adkins O'Keefe to the stand. May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Please state your name for the court.
My name is Riley Atkins O'Keefe.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a certified health and safety inspector for the Rapid River County Department of Health and Environmental Services.
How long have you been an inspector for?
I started working as a health inspector in September of 2013, so about 7 years now. I started off as an associate health inspector, and I was promoted to senior health inspector in September of 2017. At this point in my career, I've conducted at least 170 winery inspections on behalf of the county.
Tell us what that involves.
Well, as a health inspector, it's my job to look for health and safety hazards in restaurants, public facilities, wineries, other types of workplaces. I make sure that there are no code violations being committed and that everything is up to standard.
What training or certification did you undergo to become an inspector?
As part of my training, I had to receive the County Department of Health and Environmental Safety Food Service Inspector certification. I most recently took this test again in August of 2020, and I passed.
How are you involved in today's case?
Objection, Your Honor. May I be heard? Your
Yeah,
Honor,
go
I
ahead.
believe you're on mute.
It just took me a second to get to the unmute button.
Of course, Your Honor. Specifically to calls for improper opinion, opposing counsel, I believe, is trying to establish Ms. O'Keefe as an expert in regards to FDA and all these inspections, but they have not yet fulfilled the prongs of 702. I'm happy to provide the screen share for Rule 702.
Response, Your Honor? May I respond, Your Honor?
You may. If you could keep up while you respond.
We are actually not attempting to tender Ms. Adkins O'Keefe as an expert. We are simply trying to establish her background as an inspector so she's able to testify to her inspections of Peony Estates.
Your Honor, may I then respond to that?
Yeah.
Your Honor, if opposing counsel is not attempting to establish Ms. O'Keefe as an expert, we ask that we limit the scope of her testimony to that of Rule 701, which is that of a lay witness. She can testify only to what she saw, but not draw conclusions or make an expert opinion of what she did observe at the defendant's estate.
Response.
Your Honor, we will not be eliciting any expert testimony from this witness. She is simply there to testify as to what she observed during her inspections. That is all.
In that case, you may proceed. The objection is overruled. or sorry, the objection sustained, since it was an objection to, yeah, sorry.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. O'Keefe, would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please, if you don't mind.
How are you involved in today's case?
I was asked here to testify about my inspections of Peony Estates.
Before we talk about Peony Estates, I'd like to talk about Section 12100 of the Midlands Building Code. Are you aware of this code?
Yes, of course.
What specific measures and precautions does the county require wineries to take based on this code?
Well, Midland Sections 12100 is a health and safety code. So as part of it, wineries have to take reasonable measures and precautions for the general maintenance of their grounds. Essentially, this means that we expect wineries to maintain a sanitary condition with no toxic materials besides those used for cleaning. And of course, no toxic materials are allowed near the wine. And finally, employees have to be made aware of these procedures and precautions.
What's the purpose of these precautions?
Well, it's to keep our consumers safe. In the case of wine, we don't want consumers to be exposed or ingest pesticides. We have to make sure that corporations aren't putting profits over people.
Thank you, Ms. O'Keefe. Now, let's go back to your inspections of Peony Estates. How many in total were there?
I had to inspect Peony Estates a total of 3 times.
Did you ever find any code violations at these inspections?
Yes, I found
Objection, Your Honor, may I
4
be heard?
major.
May be heard.
Your Honor, this witness just testified to these code violations. If I could direct the court's attention to Midland's case law, specifically the elements, as well as the complaint in today's case, it is up to the jury to decide whether or not the defendant in today's case, Peony Estates, actually violated a statute, not this witness.
You may respond.
Your Honor, this witness is an inspector on behalf of the county. She is fully capable of testifying as to any code violations based on the Midlands Section 12100 Midlands Building Code that she found. Therefore, she's able to testify as to what she observed.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. Although she is an FDA expert, per your prior ruling, she's not, she's not qualified to be making these conclusions on whether or not Peony Estates actually violated these statutes. If I may, she's not a legal expert. She's not a lawmaker. She wouldn't have an understanding of whether or not this was actually violated. She can testify to what she saw and what is on her reports, but she cannot be actually making a decision on whether or not this was violated. If I may, Your Honor, the complaint actually states violation.
Response, Your Honor?
You may.
Ms. O'Keefe need not be a legal expert to know whether a code violation was been committed. Since she has been inspecting wineries for quite some time now, and she is licensed by Midlands, she has the full capability of knowing whether or not code violations were committed based on her experience working for the county.
Is determining code violations part of the scope of her employment?
Yes, Your Honor, it is, and she has done so previously.
I'm going to
Response to
suspend.
that, Your Honor.
Yes, you may.
I apologize. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I'm going to sustain the objection for now. Elicit from the witness that determining code violations are part of her job, and then if you still have an objection, you can object then.
Yes, Your Honor.
You may
Yes,
continue.
Your Honor. Ms. O'Keefe, is finding health code violations a part of your job as a Midlands inspector?
Yes, of course. It's my job to go into these workplaces and determine if they're up to code. If they're not up to code, I have to write it down as a violation and let them know what they can do to improve in the future.
So based on your experience as a Midlands inspector, did you find any code violations at Peony Estates?
Yes, unfortunately, I found 4 major health code violations at my last inspection of Peony Estates, which was May 8th, 2019. I found all these violations in the bottling area.
Ms. O'Keefe, if I were to show you a map of Peony Estates, would you recognize it?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, I will be sharing Exhibit 4, which pursuant to Stipulation 3 has already been pre-admitted.
Proceed.
Ms. O'Keefe, where on this map did you find all these violations?
So I found all the violations you can see in the top right corner where it says kitchen, tasting room, bottling area, and dining room.
Now, let's break each of the violations you mentioned down one by one. What was the first one?
So I actually prepared a little slideshow so I can better
Objection,
explain.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
You may.
Your Honor, this copy of Exhibit 4 actually has 4 arrows that are not present on the copies provided to the defense. If I may, we are happy to provide our own copy, which is the ones provided in the materials for today's case. If I also may, opposing counsel did not lay the proper foundation for this in regards to those specific arrows. This would not be a fair and accurate copy and would not, alterations would have been made since this was last present.
Response, Your Honor?
May.
Considering the Zoom nature of this tournament, because Ms. O'Keefe is not able to physically point to this bottling area, we thought that it would be appropriate to simply place arrows that do not in any way obstruct anything else on this exhibit. In addition, opposing counsel has been shown this prior to starting this round.
I'm going to overrule the objection. You can proceed.
Yes, Your Honor.
So Ms. O'Keefe, what was the first, or you mentioned that you prepared a demonstrative?
Yes, yeah, I was saying that I had a slideshow prepared so I could better explain each of the violations one by one.
Your Honor, permission to share this demonstrative. Opposing counsel has been shown it prior to this.
Response. You're just sharing this with the witness, right? Or
Yes, Your Honor.
answer the jury. Okay, then go ahead and proceed.
So Ms. O'Keefe, what was the first violation that you found?
Well, as you can see here, the first violation was that I found 3 containers of pesticide that were present in the bottling facility. And they were in such close proximity to the open wine bottles that I really thought it was a clear danger to consumer health.
What was the second violation?
I noticed
Objection,
that
Your Honor. I apologize. I was trying to unmute myself. It took a minute. Per your prior ruling, Ms. O'Keefe is not an expert. She just said that it would pose a serious risk to consumer health. That is drawing a conclusion from what she saw and goes beyond the scope of a lay witness just testifying to what she did see.
Response, Your Honor? Ms. O'Keefe, once again, is a health inspector, and because of all of her experience that she has testified to prior as being a health inspector, she is fully aware of when something is a danger to consumer health. In fact, her entire job as a health inspector is to determine whether or not something is posing a danger to consumer health. In addition, she has completed multiple certifications to know about this.
I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes.
Please
Ms. O'Keefe, thank you, Your Honor. Ms. O'Keefe, what was the second violation that you found?
My apologies, I was muted. So for the second violation, I noticed that the floor drainage system was not properly draining excess liquids from the bottling process. Dirt and debris were visible just below the drain grate, likely causing the backup.
Objection, Your Honor, to relevance. May I be heard?
You may.
Your Honor, the dirt and debris found in the drainage system is not relevant in any ways to today's case. I would also like to raise an objection for improper character evidence. I believe opposing counsel is attempting to use this in conformity therewith to show that just because there was dirt and debris, which is a completely separate issue to pesticide use and storage, which is the question in today's case, that PNES states will also not, will also have issues in relation to their use and storage.
I'm going to overrule the objection. You can continue.
Yeah.
Ms. O'Keefe, would you like to continue with your answer?
I was just about finished. Basically, there was an issue with the floor drainage. You could see the dirt and debris right above the drain grate, and so there was a backup and things weren't draining correctly.
What about the third violation?
In the third violation, the employees who worked in the bottling area expressed to me that they were confused about the safe handling of pesticide, and they did not understand the importance of keeping pesticides away from the wine. This obviously concerned me because pesticides are a poison, and we expect employees to treat them as such.
Lastly, what was the fourth violation?
I found a bottle of wine labeled Cara that was sitting on a shelf near where the pesticide canisters were. I asked an employee about it. I think his name was like Kirby Doolittle or something, why the bottle was there. And I was told that Harper Martini requested the bottle be separate from everything else.
So based on everything that you saw, was Peony Estates following section 12100 of the Midlands Building Code?
No. As you can see here, we had issues with the personnel not understanding what safety standards were. Peony Estates wasn't keeping their premises clean, and they were exposing their drinks to toxins.
No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. May I begin?
You may.
Ms. O'Keefe, you weren't at the Peony Estates during the rehearsal dinner, were you?
No.
In fact, you weren't at Peony Estates at all on June 7th?
No, I wasn't there. I had no reason to be.
And you weren't involved in the wedding?
No, I wasn't. I didn't know the Martinis at all.
And you never met Genesis Petrillo, right?
No, I wasn't able to. She gave me a phone call expressing to me some issues. Sorry, can I explain? Okay.
Miss O'Keefe, I was just asking if you've met Genesis Petrillo.
Well, I was trying to explain to you. She called me on the phone and I was able to.
Miss O'Keefe, just the yes or no,
I'm sorry.
please.
I didn't have the opportunity.
Objection, Your Honor. I ask that opposing counsel allow my witness to fully answer the question.
Your Honor, may I respond?
You may.
I simply asked Miss O'Keefe if she has or has not met Genesis Petrillo. I did not ask her whether or not she was ever able to or why she wasn't able to. This goes beyond the scope of my question.
I'm going to sustain the objection. Allow her to answer the question.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Miss O'Keefe, just yes or no, have you ever met Genesis Petrillo?
No, I was never able to. I only had a phone call with her and she expressed to me some concerns with Peony Estates.
Now I want to take you to that first inspection that you performed. It was in November.
Correct.
You went to Peony Estates?
Yes, I did, as a standard inspection.
And you went in person, right?
Yes, I did.
Now I want to talk about the end of the inspection. You found that employees received training.
Yes, at that time in 2015.
And you found that they were knowledgeable.
Yes, at that time.
They followed hygienic practices.
Objection, Your Honor, to relevance.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
Yes.
Yes, Your Honor. Opposing counsel already opened the door. They were talking about the practices at Peony Estates. That's what's in question today. In fact, that's one of the elements. It talks about the acts and or omission of acts that Peony Estates did. I'm trying to establish through this witness what Peony Estates did and did not perform.
I'm going to overrule the objection. You can proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Ms. O'Keefe, directing you back to my question, the employees were knowledgeable.
At that time, yes.
They followed hygienic practices.
Yes, at that time they did.
And during that visit, they protected food from contamination.
I found that at that time, yes, they were in compliance.
And they conformed with disposal standards.
I'm sorry, with what standards?
Disposal standards.
Oh, yes, they did.
Peony Estates, to your knowledge, at the end of that first inspection, Ms. Martini moved pesticides to an appropriate location, correct?
Yes, I instructed her that she needed to move them to a storage shed, and I found that she did at that time.
And in that first visit, pesticides were not in the kitchen, correct?
No, I don't believe so.
They were not in the production area.
No.
They were not in wine storage.
No, not at that time.
And not in the bottling area.
Not on this visit, no. They were not in the bottling area at that time.
And you found the vineyard grounds to be in compliance, right?
Yes, I did.
You were not concerned about the wine production area?
Not at that time, no.
Not the barrel cave?
No, not at that time.
Not the bottling facility?
Again, not at that time, no. There was no issues at that time.
Now I want to move on to the second visit. You collected some wine samples that day.
I did, yes.
You collected 20%,
Yes, I chose them at random.
and you took them to get them tested.
Yes, just to make sure that they had acceptable levels of contaminant.
And you'd recognize that test if I showed it to you today?
Yes, I would. I was able to see the results.
Your Honor, permission to bring up Exhibit 9. This has been pre-admitted.
You may.
Ms. O'Keefe, are you able to see the exhibit?
No, I'm not. It hasn't popped up for me yet. Oh, there it is. Okay.
Now, Ms. O'Keefe, this is a fair and accurate copy?
Yes, it is.
No changes or alterations have been made?
Not that I can see, no.
And Ms. O'Keefe, on that bolded line, it says isofenphos, correct?
Yes, yeah, it does.
And there is no asterisk, no dot on that number, correct?
No, there's no dot, so it was an acceptable level. However, it was high, so I kept monitoring on it.
But just to be clear, Ms. O'Keefe, it did not violate the standards, did it?
No, legally it didn't violate any standards.
Thank you. We can take this down now. Now, just to be clear, Ms. O'Keefe, there are acceptable levels of pesticides, aren't there?
Correct, yes. The FDA does designate a certain amount of contaminants that are acceptable in food and drink.
Ms. O'Keefe, do you also check the storage location for the pesticides?
Yes, it is my job to make sure that pesticides are properly stored.
And when you went there, it was more than 50 feet away, wasn't it?
On which occasion?
The second visit.
Yes, it was.
So they were in compliance.
The storage shed was, but I was concerned that employees weren't actually
But Ms.
storing
O'Keefe,
it there.
Objection, Your Honor, to non-responsive. May I be heard?
You may.
Your Honor, the witness went beyond what I asked. They were talking about other things besides just the conformity of this pesticide location.
Any response?
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. O'Keefe is simply elaborating on her response so the jury can get a better picture of what was going on.
I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Continue.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Ms. O'Keefe, I want to talk about that third visit. It was a surprise visit, right?
Yes, it was.
You checked the wine cellar.
Yes.
It was clean.
Yes, I saw.
It was well organized.
Yes, it was.
There were no pests.
Nope, not that I could see.
You checked the vineyard.
I did.
There were no health violations.
No, all the health violations were located in the bottling facility.
But Ms. O'Keefe, I just asked you about the vineyard. Were there health violations at the vineyard?
Like I said, no.
You checked the pesticide storage.
Yes.
It was at an appropriate distance away.
Well, yes, but that's not where they were storing their
Ms. O'Keefe.
pesticides.
Ms. O'Keefe, I didn't ask you that. I just asked you about the storage shed. It was an appropriate distance away?
Technically, yes, it was.
And the wine production, you checked that as well?
I did.
It was clean.
Yes.
It was well organized.
Yes.
You conducted a full investigation of Peony Estates, didn't you?
Of course, it was part of my job.
And you didn't shut them down.
I put them on probation because of the violations I found.
Ms. O'Keefe, objection, Your Honor. Non-responsive. I asked them.
I'm sorry, was there an objection?
Yes, Your Honor. I asked the opposing counsel allow my witness to fully explain her answers.
I'm going to overrule that
Your
objection. Defense can continue.
Your Honor, objection to non-responsive. I asked whether or not they shut down Peony Estates, and the witness responded that they put them on probation. They're on a completely different topic.
I'm going to overrule that objection as well. Please continue.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. O'Keefe, just to be clear, yes or no, did you shut down Peony Estates?
No.
Did you ever visit Peony Estates again after May 8th?
No, I did not have the opportunity.
You're a health inspector, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you take your job seriously?
Yes, of course.
You want to make sure no danger comes to the public.
Of course, that's true.
Just to be clear, at no point during any of your 3 visits did you ever shut down Peony Estates.
No, I wanted to give them an opportunity to fix their mistakes.
And to
Time.
your knowledge, Peony Estates is still open, right?
Time.
Okay.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. May this witness be excused? Are you asking for this witness to be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
The witness may be excused. Call your next witness.
At this time, Your Honor, the plaintiff rests his case in chief.
Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break. Please remember that the video is being publicly broadcast via YouTube live stream, and I will see you shortly. believe the 5 minutes is up. Is the defense ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Are the plaintiffs ready?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, defense, you may call your first witness.
The defense calls Dr. Renfield Cannon to the stand. Please state your name for the court.
Hi, how are you? My name's Dr. Renfield Cannon.
And tell us a little bit about your background.
Oh, well, I'm a doctor in toxicology. You know, it all started back when I was little. I had some really bad food poisoning, so I decided that I never wanted to see anyone else have to go through anything like that. So I got my undergrad from Ohio State, and I got my MD from Harvard, summa cum laude, by the way. And, you know, I was a chief toxicologist, but I thought that was a little bit boring. So I wanted to go into the fast lane, so I went into consulting.
Doctor, what's with the stethoscope that you have?
Oh, you know, after I finish my testimony, I want to go to my local clinic. I volunteer over there, especially with the pandemic going on.
Dr. Cannon, can you tell us a little bit about your experience as a consultant?
Well, let's see. I have testified in over 35 legal cases, typically for civil or criminal defendants.
Did you review over any facts or data for today's case?
Oh, you betcha I did. I examined Genesis's toxicology report, her toxins analysis, and her death certificate, along with a test of a Cara wine bottle, and an alcohol impairment chart. In terms of statements, I examined Dr. Kwan, the treating physician's report, as well as Ms. Rodriguez, her statement.
Was there any sort of method that you used in going over this data?
Oh, of course. I used the math method. So the M stands for your materials that you gather. The A is how you use those materials to make analyses. Your T is for your theories that you make off the analyses. And your H is for your hypotheses that you make off your theories.
Would you say that this math method is reliable in your line of work?
Oh, you betcha. It's what I was taught at Harvard. It's been peer reviewed, known error rate, publicized all over the place. You know, if you don't have the body, it's the best way to go.
Dr. Cannon, did you reliably apply this math method for today's case?
Absolutely, I did. Yes, sir.
How'd you get involved?
Well, I was hired by the defense counsel to examine the findings by the plaintiff, by specifically Dr. Kwan, the treating physician, and to see what my own findings would be in today's case.
And what were your findings?
Although pesticide poisoning is likely, I found that there were three other possibilities that were ruled out, or that weren't successfully ruled out to a medical degree of scientific certainty. I made a little demonstrative if I could show you what I'm talking about here.
Of course. Now, before you proceed, Doctor, did you rely upon this demonstrative in coming to your conclusions today?
Oh, you betcha I did.
And in your opinion, will it aid the jury in better understanding your testimony?
Absolutely, yes, sir.
Your Honor, permission for my witness to screen share his demonstrative?
You may.
Dr. Cannon, let's start with your first finding. What was it?
My first finding is that it's possible that Genesis Petrillo could have died from alcohol poisoning.
And how could that have been possible?
Well, Genesis Petrillo's blood alcohol content, BAC, when it was tested, was a 0.16. However, it's very possible that earlier that night, based off the symptoms she exhibited comparing to an alcohol impairment chart, that she may have had a higher, possibly fatal blood alcohol content earlier that night.
And would you recognize that alcohol impairment chart if I showed you it today?
Absolutely.
Permission to screen share what's known as Exhibit 23 as the alcohol impairment chart?
You may.
Doctor, what am I showing you?
Well, this is the alcohol impairment chart.
And it's a fair and accurate copy?
Oh, you betcha it is.
Has it been changed or altered in any way, has it?
No, I don't believe so.
At this time, defense offers to move Exhibit 23 into evidence.
Response?
Objection to hearsay, Your Honor.
I'm going to overrule that objection. You may continue. It's going to be admitted.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Doctor, tell us a little bit about this chart.
Well, it's the alcohol impairment chart set out by the Midland Center for Public Health, We show this to some of our new consultants, and a good way to always remember it is this little acronym of the first letters of each level of impairment that I like to teach new consultants. It's that baby ivory elephants have sweet lives. But if you're down there at that L, the life-threatening impairment there, that elephant's not going to have a sweet life. It's going to be a short one because that's very severe impairment.
Now, can you point out some of the symptoms that Genesis experienced and where they line up on this chart?
Oh, yes. So Genesis exhibited symptoms of an inability to stand or walk, vomiting, incontinence. She went unconscious prior to going to the hospital, and ultimately she went into a coma, and she died from respiratory paralysis, also known as respiratory arrest.
Now, doctor, let's move on to your second finding. What was that?
Well, the second possibility is that it's very possible that Miss Petrillo could have died from an untreated ailment.
And why is it important in today's case?
Well, Genesis Petrillo had not had any kind of checkup for about 3 years prior to her death. So during those 3 years, it's very possible that Miss Petrillo could have developed an allergy to something she was given that night or a liver disease.
Can you elaborate a little about a liver disease?
Yes, well, a sign of that liver disease is a low amount of a compound called acetylcholinesterase. That night, Genesis exhibited a low amount of that compound, and if she had this liver disease, that would have made handling alcohol much harder on her body, and it could have potentially caused her death that night.
Doctor, let's talk about your third finding. What was that?
Well, it's also possible that Miss Petrillo could have died from an outside contaminant, something that wasn't the wine, but also contaminated with the pesticide. And that's just based off of the way that the stomach works.
And can you tell the jury, how does the stomach work?
Well, let's suppose that you have a pesticide contaminated unwashed tomato, and you have a perfectly normal wine. You put both of them in the stomach, and the stomach's going to mix and churn everything around in there. So if you were to cut open that stomach and examine what's in there, the wine could potentially look contaminated, although in reality, we wouldn't actually know what the real contaminant was.
Dr. Cannon, what were your overall conclusions for today's case?
My overall conclusion is that these three possibilities weren't effectively ruled out. Although pesticide poisoning is likely, and although it being through that wine is likely, these other three were not ruled out to a degree of scientific certainty, so we really can't say what happened in today's case, and we can't be too quick to blame.
Thank you, doctor. No further questions.
Cross-examination,
Yes, Your Honor.
proceed.
Dr. Cannon, you presented 3 alternative causes of death.
3 possibilities, yes.
One of these possibilities was alcohol poisoning.
That's correct, yes, ma'am.
But this possibility wouldn't explain all of the symptoms Miss Petrillo had.
That's correct, yes, ma'am.
Specifically, it doesn't explain 3 of her symptoms.
Which 3 are you referring to?
It doesn't explain her constricted pupils,
That's correct, yes, ma'am.
her abnormally low acetylcholinesterase levels,
That's correct.
nor would it explain the presence of pesticides in her stomach.
No, it wouldn't explain for that.
In fact, Miss Petrillo's BAC was tested to be 0.16.
Right, it was a 0.16 at the time it was tested, yes, ma'am.
And a BAC of 0.16 on its own is extremely unlikely to lead to death.
Right, on its own, that's unlikely, yes, ma'am.
You say it's possible, however, that Miss Petrillo's peak BAC was higher.
That's correct. Earlier that night, it could have been something higher than that.
But it's impossible to determine what Miss Petrillo's peak BAC was that evening.
That's correct, yes, ma'am.
There's no scientific basis for claiming that it was any higher than 0.3.
Well, we simply don't know, that's correct.
Dr. Cannon, you don't even know how much alcohol Miss Petrillo drank.
I got the statements off of Angel Rodriguez's statement, but my own personal knowledge, not entirely sure, no.
So you don't actually know how much alcohol she drank.
That's correct.
And as a medical expert, you know that low levels of acetylcholinesterase are so closely correlated with pesticide exposure.
Pesticide exposure, or as I said earlier, potentially that liver disease.
Is that a yes?
Kind of, yes.
Dr. Kennan, you know that doctors use this to conclusively diagnose pesticide poisoning.
That's correct, yes, ma'am.
You're also aware that even small amounts of pesticide exposure can lead to pesticide poisoning.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Now, the second alternative cause of death you present is hepatic disease.
No, it was the allergy.
You did not mention any ailments on your direct?
I mentioned the liver disease after I mentioned the allergy. You mentioned the next thing I said, so no.
However, hepatic disease is a liver disease that you mentioned.
Yes, it's passable.
And there's no evidence of this disease in her medical records.
That's correct, of the record she had.
There's also no evidence of allergies.
That's correct, of what she had from her diagnoses in the past.
In addition, this liver disease that you mentioned is associated with the presence of yellow skin.
Jaundice, that's correct.
Or yellow eyes.
Yes, ma'am.
But Ms. Petrillo did not have either of those symptoms.
To my knowledge of what Dr. Klein reported, no.
You also mentioned that she could have died from an outside contaminant.
That's correct, yes, ma'am.
Now, you reviewed the toxicology report of
I
Ms.
did. Oh, my apologies.
You did review the toxicology report of Ms. Petrillo?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Your Honor, I will be sharing Exhibit 6, which has already been pre-admitted.
Go ahead.
Now, you're aware that on this exhibit, it says that no food remnants that were tested appeared to contain pesticides.
Let me see where it is. Yeah, none of them appeared to be to have pesticides. That's correct.
So there's no evidence that any outside contaminant could have caused Ms. Petrillo's death.
Well, it's still possible, but it is, especially again with the way the stomach mixing, it may have been passable, but based off of that report, no.
But Dr. Cannon, there's no evidence.
Objection asked and answered. May I be heard?
I'm going to overrule that objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Dr. Cannon, just to be clear for the jury, there was no evidence of this possibility.
That's correct, sure.
And you're aware as a medical expert that it's important to have evidence for your conclusions.
Yes, that's correct.
Lastly, you reviewed Ms. Petrillo's death certificate.
That's correct, I did.
Your Honor, I will be sharing Exhibit 7 pursuant to Stipulation 3. This has already been pre-admitted.
You may.
So on this death certificate, it states that pesticide poisoning is a cause of death for Ms. Petrillo.
Right, and that was where I had my disagreement with it. Yes, ma'am.
But you do believe that it's highly unlikely that Ms. Petrillo died because of the alcohol.
Highly unlikely. It is unlikely, yes.
So you do believe it's highly unlikely.
That's correct.
And just to be clear for the jury, you think that respiratory arrest is the most likely cause of Ms. Petrillo's death?
Well, yes, she died because of respiratory arrest. It's when your brain isn't telling your lungs to intake or inhale or exhale oxygen, that's respiratory arrest. That's correct.
So that's a yes?
That's correct. That was her cause of death.
And you also believe that pesticide poisoning is the most likely cause of this respiratory arrest?
As I said before, yes, ma'am.
And that the wine produced by Peony Estates is the most likely cause of this pesticide poisoning?
As I said before, yes, ma'am.
No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just asked that Dr. Cannon be allowed to step down.
You may be excused. You may call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Blair Osborne to the stand. May I begin? Please introduce yourself to the court.
Hi, my name is Blair Osborne.
Ms. Osborne, why are you here today?
Well, I worked with Peony Estates for about 4 years now, and I was the wedding planner for the wedding of Casey and Genesis over at Peony Estates.
And what's your occupation?
Well, not only am I a wedding planner, but also an events planner. I'm one of the top event planner in all of Midlands.
Now let's talk about the specific wedding at Peony Estates. How were you involved?
Well, I was the wedding planner, so I was in charge of contacting vendors and making sure that things were organized and proper. But Peony Estates has always been great to work with, so really I just had to do my side and they stayed organized.
Is this your first time working with Peony Estates?
Oh, goodness, no. Over the 4 years that I've been working there or working with them, I've hosted little birthday parties and weddings and about 83 events now. Yeah.
And what has your experience been like?
Well, the staff have just always been so professional and diligent. I can't rave about them enough.
And how familiar are you with Peony Estates?
Well, pretty familiar. I've been there not only for the 83 events, but I also have to go there to prepare for the events and do walkthroughs and make sure that my customers are comfortable there before their event.
Would you recognize a map of Peony Estates?
Yes.
Your Honor, permission to bring up a copy of the map. This is Exhibit 4, which has been pre-admitted.
You may.
Miss Osborne, what am I showing you?
Well, that looks like a map of Peony Estates.
Is it fair and accurate?
Yes, I believe so.
Have any changes or alterations been made since you've last seen it?
No, not that I can see.
How could you tell the jury? Where did you work?
Well, primarily, I worked within the whole kitchen, tasting room, dining room area while hosting events. Every once in a while, we do out by the gazebo, but for the most part, our events range from small to large, so in the dining room a lot.
Now let's take those in turn. Did you see any pesticides in the kitchen?
No, never.
Did you see any in the dining room?
No.
Did you see any in the tasting area?
No, I would never allow that.
Did you see anyone using pesticides?
No, never.
Thank you. We can take this down now. Now, I want to take you to the night of that wedding rehearsal. What happened then?
Well, the wedding rehearsal was pretty normal as far as weddings go. I mean, there's emotions involved and such, but I made sure all the guests were comfortable, and there were toasts, and dinner was wonderful. And let's see, Harper gave a toast and a bottle of wine to Genesis.
Do you know what bottle of wine this was?
No, it was a bottle of wine, but I don't remember seeing like a name or anything.
And you mentioned Harper gave it to Genesis. Do you know what Genesis did with it?
Well, I saw Genesis pour some. And then later I saw Genesis pour some more, but I don't know if they drank it or if it was for somebody else.
And to be clear, do you know if Genesis actually drank the wine?
Drank it? No, actually.
What was Genesis like that night?
Well, later I saw Genesis and some of the other members of the wedding party over at one of the cocktail stations I had set up. Everybody loves those. And Genesis and one of their friends seemed a little drunk, but I wasn't worried.
What did Genesis look like?
I mean, overall, pretty okay. I mean, drunk, but like I said, I wasn't worried. I told them just drink some water, go to bed early, and they weren't going to be any trouble to me tomorrow. They'd just be a little hungover, thought.
Now, Miss Osborne, at that wedding rehearsal, was there other food present?
Oh, goodness, yes. We had a buffet and a dinner hall laid out by our caterer, and I believe there was other drinks and such. Yes.
And was this caterer from Peony Estates?
Well, the caterer, Sam Arnold, he's worked with Peony Estates and I in the past, and he's been great to work with also. I don't believe he's an exact employee of Peony Estates, but we've all worked together numerous times.
And besides the bottle that Miss Martini gave, were there other drinks present?
Well, I was pretty busy with guests, but everybody was enjoying themselves. People were drinking and eating and laughing like a wedding should.
Now I want to take you to the morning of the wedding. What happened then?
Well, I got there early to prepare any last minute little details and such, and I ran into Harper and we went to go find Casey and Genesis. And well, Casey just looked great. But then about an hour later, I found out that Genesis was in the hospital and had gotten sick and then later passed away.
To your knowledge, did anyone else go to the hospital?
No, I mean, one of the members of the wedding party went with Genesis, but nobody else was sick.
And to your knowledge, did those other people also consume things at Peony Estates?
Well, yes, like I said, everybody was having a great time, eating, drinking, and enjoying themselves.
Have you ever questioned the safety at Peony Estates?
Oh, goodness, no, never. I pride myself on creating the best events for all of my clients, and this wedding's no exception. I always make sure that my vendors and venues are always up to the best of standards.
Ms. Osborne, you mentioned 83 events. During any of these 83 events, have you ever heard of an issue about pesticides?
No, never.
At this time, we have no further questions.
Cross.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yeah, proceed.
Miss Osborne, you're a wedding planner.
Yes, well, and other events, but yes, one of the things I do is weddings.
You've held 61 weddings, 12 birthday parties, 9 corporate luncheons, and a funeral wake at Peony Estates.
Objection, Your Honor, to compound?
Overrule that.
Yes.
Miss Osborne, would you like me to ask the question again?
Yes, if you could. I heard there's a lot of numbers.
You've held 61 weddings, 12 birthday parties, 9 corporate luncheons, and a funeral wake at Peony Estates.
See, I don't have my books on me, but that sounds right.
So you've worked heavily with Peony Estates for years.
Yes, they're always up to my standards and been great.
And you planned the wedding of Casey Soto and Genesis Petrillo.
Yes, Harper asked me to.
And you made frequent trips to Peony Estates in order to plan this wedding.
Yes, I have to do the run-throughs.
Now, I want to talk about the people you're familiar with. You're acquainted with the staff of Peony Estates.
Yes, I am.
And you have plenty of experience with wedding caterer Sam Arnold.
Yes.
And you know the family of Harper Martini.
Not extremely well personally, but we're on a first name basis.
Now, I want to make it very clear for the jury, Miss Osborne. You don't know how Peony Estates makes their wine.
No, I'm not involved with that process.
You don't know how their grapes are roped off.
No.
You don't know which grapes are picked.
No.
Objection, Your Honor, to cumulative. Ms. Osborne has already testified that she... Yes, Your Honor.
Please continue.
You don't know which grapes are picked.
No, I do the serving of the wine more.
You don't know where they keep their pesticides.
I've been around the estates, but no, I'm not exactly sure where the pesticides are.
And you don't know how those pesticides should be applied.
No, that's not as an event planner what I do.
In fact, you don't know any of the safety procedures of a winery.
No.
Now, I want to talk about someone who is familiar with the safety procedures at Peony Estates. A few days after the wedding party at Black Bear Casino, you had a meeting with Miss Martini and Casey Soto.
Objection, Your Honor, to attorney testifying. I believe opposing counsel just said, I want to talk about someone with knowledge.
I will sustain that objection. Please rephrase your question.
Yes, Your
Motion
Honor.
to strike, Your Honor.
It'll be struck from the record.
Yes, Your Honor. A few days after the wedding party at Black Bear Casino, you had a meeting with Miss Martini and Casey Soto.
I see. In May, yes.
And during that meeting, Miss Martini got a call.
see. Yes.
She answered it.
Yeah, I believe so.
And she said, I don't care what that clown Adkins O'Keefe says.
I did hear that.
She said, do not waste the employee's time with more training.
Yeah, but I wasn't sure really what kind of training.
In fact, she said, do not have them move the pesticide.
Yeah.
And Miss Osborne, since this incident, you have chosen to publicly distance yourself and your company from Peony Estates.
Oh, well, goodness, we don't know what happened to poor Genesis. And so I did make the decision that until I can return to working with Peony Estates, that I would work with Rosie and Pedro's. But I really had to question all of my vendors and those that I get supplies from because we just don't know. I mean, anything could have happened to poor Genesis. And until we can know what happened, I really had to make some questions.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
Yes, Your Honor.
Proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Miss Osborne, earlier you were asked about Adkins O'Keefe. Who is this?
Honestly, I don't know. I just heard that name once.
And you were also asked about pesticides. Can you provide some context?
Well, I mean, the States has always been very clean and organized up to my standards. I've had no complaints from clients, but I've never seen them spray while I was out with clients. I've never seen them spray during any events or anything that would make me question how they keep things so clean.
No further questions.
Any recross?
No recross, Your Honor.
Your Honor, permission for this witness to step down?
The witness is excused. You may call your next witness.
At this time, the defense calls Austin Lewis.
Okay, proceed.
Please state your name for the court.
My name is Austin Jean Lewis.
And what's your current occupation?
Well, mate, I'm the Conehead winemaker here at Peony Estates. That means I'm responsible for every grape produced in the vineyards to every bottled wine. From the time we receive our grape seeds to the time our bottles get sent to our happy customers.
And do you know why you're in court today?
Unfortunately, I do. People are saying that we are responsible for the death of Genesis Petrillo.
And what, if anything, do you know about that death?
They're saying that Genesis died because of some pesticides and that Peony Estates is responsible, but I really don't believe how that could have happened. We've always been taking the necessary precautions.
Do you know why Peony Estates is being sued today?
Well, mate, I could just imagine that Genesis's family is in a lot of pain and they're looking to blame someone, and that just happens to be Peony Estates this time round.
And what is your experience with chemical pesticides?
Well, we started using chemical pesticides, I want to say back in 2015. We were concerned about contamination though, so I personally started to train all of the employees on the storages and pesticide usage in general. Chemical pesticides we've seen though have been the most effective way to keep out pests, but it's really a shame it makes us toss out so many grapes.
What do you mean you have to toss out so many grapes?
So we grow our grapes on a vineyard slope. So pretend my hand is the slope, right? When we spray the pesticides, we typically spray them at the top of the slope. And that means all of the excess tends to run to the bottom. But because the bottom of the slope is a bit flatter, those grapes at the bottom tend to soak them up almost like a sponge, making them a little bit more poisonous. And that's why we toss those grapes.
And do you use chemical pesticides anywhere else?
Well, back in 2018, we realized we was losing the fight against the pests. So we pulled out the big guns and we used chemical pesticides in the wine cave and around the bottling area, I believe.
What is the procedure for using chemical pesticides in the production area?
Well, before we spray the wine cave or anything, we empty out the cave of any wine or wine precursors before we spray it. And then we shut down our equipment. We also either move the equipment out or we wrap it in plastic wrap before we spray. And after we spray, we vacate that area for a good 48 hours or so. Spraying pesticides indoor is a pain, but we have to follow the necessary health and safety regulations.
And what are those regulations?
Yeah, the Food and Drug people have a rules that we got to follow in order to have a safe establishment. And I'll be honest, we've made mistakes here and there, but Peony Estates strives to maintain a good business for its customers. And we were definitely safe during the wedding rehearsal, especially since our local health inspector gave us a few recommendations to follow.
And what were those recommendations?
So we were really given 3 main recommendations. One being the location of the pesticides, the drainage, and the training of our employees. Let me tell you, our biggest priority was safety, so not much else mattered at that point.
Let's take those in turn. What, if anything, did you do about the first recommendation?
Right, so in regards to location, we decided to create a new storage area that was 600 feet away from the production area. Can you believe that?
And what, if anything, did you do about the second recommendation?
Well, the drainage, we've never really had a problem like that before, so we hired a plumber to take care of that problem.
And what, if anything, did you do about the third recommendation?
So, I personally always train the employees. So they've had training before, and we just put up some new signs in regards to storage and usage of pesticides. Personally, I increased my vigilance about our pesticide usage in general. I was hoping after the wedding we could also just retrain our employees.
And have you ever interacted with Lonnie Paris?
Man, yeah, I have.
And how were those interactions?
Around, I think I want to say 2018, I noticed someone was taking an odd amount of tours at a winery. It's someone by the name of Alex Song. I found it quite off for someone to take so many tours, so I did some digging and found that this Alex Song was actually Lonnie Paris, an investigative journalist looking for some work. I understand now that my old boss put Paris up to it. I was willing to let it go and, let him pay the money for these tours, but they was just causing so much problem.
What do you mean by problems?
In 2019, I caught Paris snooping around an employee-only restricted area. Who does that? So for safety reasons, I had to ban them from the property. Despite that, Paris came back anyway, during that same month, I believe, in disguise, trying to sneak on property. So I had to kick them out. I never saw them again after that. I know Paris claimed that she'd been at the estates at the end of May, I want to say, but mate, that never happened.
And think about all of your experience with Peony Estates. Have you ever witnessed any practices that would be considered bad for business?
Listen, mate, no one's perfect, but I will tell you this. We've been given recommendations and we intend to just continue to follow those as well.
No further questions. I pass the witness.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
May.
Ms. Lewis, let's start off by talking about your stake in Peony Estates. You're aware that you own 10% of the winery?
Yeah, proudly so.
Which means that $1 in every $10 that comes through that door goes directly into your pocket.
Yeah.
Ms. Lewis, that's a lot of money, right?
I mean, it depends what you consider a lot of money, but I would say it's a fair stake.
And you wouldn't want that money stream to stop, would you?
I mean, no, it's mostly because I love Peony Estates and I love working for them. And so that's just, on the side, it's a bonus, really.
Okay, so I'd like to direct your attention to Exhibit 2B. Your Honor, let the record reflect I'm showing the pre-admitted Exhibit 2B to the witness and the jury, pursuant to Stipulation 3.
The record will so reflect.
Ms. Lewis, you recognize this picture?
Yeah, that looks like the label for the Cora wine that we make here at the Estates.
Right, it's a picture of the 2019 Cora wine label, right?
Yeah, that's what it says, yeah.
Which is a wine that was produced at Peony Estates?
Yeah, it's Peony Estates wine, correct.
And Ms. Lewis, you'd agree with me that this bottle of wine is incredibly important to today's trial.
I mean, I suppose so.
Okay, so let's talk about this wine then. Let's talk about what's inside the bottle, in fact, the wine itself. You know that the grapes that you use to make this wine are treated with pesticides.
Yeah, so we sprayed pesticides in the vineyards just as a precautionary measure, though. Like I mentioned, we'd had a lot of problems with pests in the past, so we didn't want those problems to continue.
And you use these pesticides because they're the cheapest method to get rid of bugs.
I mean, we were really overwhelmed with bugs, mate, so we had to do something in order to get rid of the bugs. And
Ms. Lewis, is that a yes to my question? You use these pesticides because they're the cheapest method to get rid of bugs.
I mean, that was cheap, yeah.
You use these pesticides because it's the cheapest method to get rid of bugs.
Objection asked and answered. May I be heard?
I'm going to overrule the objection.
Ms. Lewis, I'll ask again. You use these pesticides because they're the cheapest method to get rid of bugs.
Yeah, it was cheap, yes.
The cheapest method, Ms. Lewis.
Yes.
And you spray this pesticide on all of the grapes.
Yeah, well, we spray them at the top of the slope, and yeah, it just happens to run down to all of the grapes.
Ms. Lewis, you're aware that this pesticide is toxic to humans, right?
Yeah, it is.
But even though you knew this pesticide was poisonous, you still used it anyway.
I mean, it was the most effective one that we could control the pests with, so we had no other choice, really.
Because it was the cheapest method.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about how that pesticide interacts with your grapes. You said that the vineyard is located on a slope, right?
Yeah, our vineyards are on a slope, correct.
And as you said, that means the pesticides collected the grapes at the bottom of the slope.
Yeah, because at the time we had problems with drainage, so they would tend to pile up at the bottom, yeah.
Now, Ms. Lewis, the thought of pesticides collecting at the bottom of the slope terrified you.
I mean, yeah, it wasn't good for like business practice, so it was a little bit like concerning, yeah.
It scared you enough that you threw out a large portion of your crop just to be safe.
Yeah, I normally throw out some grapes every season, yes.
And you did that every single year.
Yeah.
Well, actually, Ms. Lewis, except for 1 year.
Yeah, in 2018, I wasn't there to oversee the harvest, so personally, I didn't throw out those grapes that year.
Right, you told Harper Martini to.
Yeah, I wasn't there, so yes, I did tell Harper Martini to throw out the grapes.
Now, to be clear for the jury, this is the same year that the grapes from the wine from the 2019 bottle of Cara wine would have been used. The grapes would have been used for that wine. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, because we harvest our grapes a year in advance. So for the 2019 Cara, yeah, it would have been harvested in 2018.
But you have no idea if Harper Martini threw out any of those poisonous grapes, do you?
Could I say for certain, mate? No, but I assumed that all of the employees would have followed precautions and safety regulations we'd been practicing anyway.
But you're aware that Harper had a history of not taking these lethal pesticides seriously.
Yeah, I guess so.
In fact, she told you that pesticides weren't actually a big deal.
I think I remember her saying that at some point, yeah.
She told you that pesticides were just in everything nowadays.
That seems familiar.
She even forbade you from retraining your employees to handle pesticides safely.
Yeah, so I was thinking of retraining the employees after the wedding, so at that time she didn't want to retrain, yeah.
Now let's talk about the bottle itself. You're aware that you bottle all of the wine at Peony Estates in the aptly named bottling room, correct?
Yeah, I do handle the bottling of the wines, yeah.
And in the same year that you bottled the 2019 Cara wine, there was a pest problem in the bottling area.
Yeah, we had a pest problem, yeah.
So you decided to spray that room.
Yeah, we did decide to spray the bottling room.
But you didn't move any of the bottles out of the room first, did you?
Honestly, mate, I can't remember if we removed all of the bottles, but that might be right.
You didn't remove the bottles first, did you?
Yeah.
You also didn't plastic wrap the equipment either.
I don't believe we did, but yeah, I really can't remember for sure.
And you're aware that these are major health code violations.
Objection, improper legal conclusion. May I be heard?
You may.
This witness does not have any legal knowledge, therefore would not know whether or not this is a major health code violation. Rather, they would only know what is within their realm of knowledge. So this is no prior knowledge, and they do not know whether or not they violated that. This is a major health code violation.
Response, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
First of all, the witness already established on direct examination that they spoke with the the FDA inspector about these code violations. Also, Ms. Lewis is the head winemaker at Peony Estates and is very much aware of the code violations that Peony Estates was involved in.
Response?
Okay.
While Ms. Lewis may know certain aspects of the health code violation, to expect her to know every single health code and to expect her to know what constitutes a major health code violation is outside of her realm of knowledge.
I'm going to overrule the objection. Continue.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes.
Witness, please answer the question.
Would you mind re-asking your question, mate?
Ms. Lewis, you're aware that these were major health code violations.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't good business practice, so.
That's a yes to my question. They were major health code violations.
Time.
Okay, that's time. If the witness could just answer the question and then we'll proceed.
Yeah, they were.
Okay, defense, any redirect?
If I may inquire how much time we have remaining?
You have 7 seconds.
No redirect, Your Honor.
Okay. Are you? This witness may be excused. Defense, you may call your next witness.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense rests its case in chief and asks for a brief recess before closing.
We're going to have a 5-minute recess before closing.
Yes.
5 minutes is up. Are the plaintiffs and defendants ready to proceed with closing?
Plaintiff is ready to proceed.
Defense is also ready.
Okay, we will now hear closing arguments from each party. Everyone should please switch back to speaker view.
May I proceed?
You may.
May it please the court, opposing counsel, members of the jury. Nothing else matters. Those aren't my words. Those are the words of Peony Estates, a company that time and time again has put profits over people. Members of the jury, I want to take a step back from all the testimony, all the evidence that you've heard today, and I want to talk about the victim in today's case. I want to talk about Genesis Petrillo. June 7th, 2019 should have been one of the best days of Genesis's life, the day she had been waiting for years. Now, weddings can be a scary time. Things can go wrong. Guests can be late. The food might not taste good. People might get cold feet. These are all problems a bride expects to have. But the scariest problems are the ones no one should ever have to expect. We shouldn't have to worry that the plates we eat from are clean. We shouldn't have to worry that the cook washed their hands. We shouldn't have to worry that the wine we drink is poisoned with pesticides. But Genesis didn't have that luxury. She didn't have that luxury not to worry about those things at rehearsal dinner. When Genesis took that 2019 Cara wine from Harper Martini, she had no reason to expect that that wine would kill her just before she could marry the love of her life. She had no reason to expect that she would end up in the hospital just hours later, that she would die alone hours before her wedding. Now, in today's trial, we, the plaintiff, brought the charge of negligence against the winery Peony Estates, identifying them as liable for the untimely death of Genesis Petrillo. Now, to demonstrate this to you, we have to prove to you 3 elements. Number 1, that the defendant, Peony Estates, violated a health and safety law, specifically Building Code Section 12100. 2, that those violations caused the death of Genesis Petrillo. And 3, that the victim, Genesis Petrillo, is a member of the statute's protected class, which is a fact that neither party disputes in today's case. Essentially, we needed to prove to you that Peony Estates violated a health law and that that violation led to the death of the victim, Genesis Petrillo. We, the plaintiff, need to prove this to you through what's called the preponderance of the evidence, meaning that our burden was to establish that the elements are more likely than not true. Now, members of the jury, it helps to picture the preponderance of the evidence by thinking of the scales of justice. Picture each side of the scale representing the plaintiff and the defense. As the trial goes on, each side begins to pile evidence on both sides, using evidence, facts, and testimony. Even if both sides have an equal weight of evidence on the scale, all it takes is for one side to add a feather's weight to tip the scale in their favor. Members of the jury, in this case, we haven't just put a feather's weight on the scale. We've dropped a cinder block on it. So let's talk about that evidence and help you to understand how the plaintiff has met our burden and has tipped the scales in our favor. I want you, members of the jury, to pay attention to 3 important issues in today's case: the procedures, the profits, and the personnel. First, you heard about the procedures. You heard from Riley Adkins O'Keefe, a health inspector for the FDA, that Peony Estates was so negligent that just a month before the wedding, she found 4 major health code violations in the bottling area, the same bottling area where the Cara wine bottle was stored, in the same year it was bottled. We never saw any evidence that Peony Estates fixed any of those violations. You then heard from partial owner, Austin Lewis. He admitted that Peony Estates knowingly violated several health codes just a month before the wedding, just before bottling the 2019 Cara wine. You heard her say that they intentionally introduced pesticides into the same environment that the Cara wine was in. She even said that they were aware that pesticides were in all of the bottles, around all the bottles that Peony Estates served. You heard from yet another one of the defense's witnesses, Blair Osborne, say that Genesis Petrillo drank several glasses of the same wine that was directly exposed to pesticides. Second, You heard about the profits. You learned from Lonnie Paris, an investigative journalist, that Peony Estates was experiencing serious infestation problems that were cutting into their profits. You heard how because of this, the employees were asked to prepare the winery for chemical pesticide spraying and were told to do this quickly and cheaply. You again heard from Blair Osborne that just weeks before the wedding, Harper Martini told employees not to move the pesticides from the bottling area, again choosing to put profits over people. Lastly, you heard about the personnel. You heard from Danny Francasio, a winery owner herself. The Harper Martini did not understand how deadly pesticides were, and that Miss Martini had to consult Francasio about proper procedure multiple times over the span of 3 years. We saw email after email where Harper Martini struggled to understand the importance of safe pesticide usage, including 1 month before the wedding. Then you heard from Dr. Cannon, an expert witness from the defense who tried to tell you that Genesis could have died from many other causes. Yet he failed to provide any evidence of any other possible cause of death. In fact, he agreed that the pesticide poisoning was the most likely cause of death, and that it was highly unlikely that Genesis could have died for any other reason. Members of the jury, it's clear that time after time, Peony Estates cut corners and valued their profits over people, and that this blatant negligence of Midland's health code is the reason Genesis Petrillo is not with us today. We ask that you do what the facts compel, the law requires, and what justice demands. Find Peony Estates liable. Thank you.
Defense closing.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Your Honor, Mr. Teradista, members of the jury, may it please the court, in pain and looking to blame, on June 8th of 2019, Genesis Petrillo passed away. This was the morning of what was supposed to be their wedding, and Genesis's death was a tragedy. The loss of family hurts, and when we are hurt, we try and find a reason. We look to place the blame. But we must not be blinded by our pain, and we need to look past it to find the truth. And the truth in today's case is that the wine Peony Estates produced had nothing to do with Miss Petrillo's death. The wine was safe. Now, in the law, to find the truth, it's the plaintiff who has the burden of proof. And their burden is by a preponderance of the evidence, meaning more likely than not. But what the plaintiff has failed to mention is that these scales do not start off equal. The plaintiff has to meet this burden, and they start at 0. They have to prove it with witnesses, with evidence, and they did not bring that today. Now, if the plaintiff is able to meet 50%, Peony Estates is not liable. If the plaintiff misses a single feather, if that cinder block is not heavy enough to meet the building of evidence that we have, the wall that we've built, Peony Estates isn't liable. And the plaintiff has to meet this burden for each of the 4 elements we have today. Now, today's case is not one of negligence, but negligence per se. And it can be simplified into 4 parts. First, Peony Estates had to violate a statute. This had to be a safety statute. Third, it had to have something to do with Peony Estates, what they did or didn't do. And this had to lead to Miss Petrillo's death. Fourth, they have to prove that Miss Petrillo was in a protected class. The plaintiff has to prove each of these 4 elements by that standard, more likely than not. And while we agree that Miss Petrillo was in a protected class, we don't agree on any of the other points. Peony Estates did not violate the law, and they did not lead to Miss Petrillo's passing. Now, earlier you heard opposing counsel talk about the procedures, the profits, and the personnel. Let's break that down. You heard about procedures. You heard from Austin Lewis, the head winemaker at Peony Estates. You heard how they made changes, followed the FDA recommendations. They moved things out of the wine cellar before spraying. They moved to a new shed. They built a whole nother building. Why? Because that was the right thing to do. Now that building costs money, and you heard them talk again and again about putting profits over people. Tell me, where did they put profits over people? They spent money, built another building, hired employees, trained the employees. Members of the jury, they put the people over the profits. You also heard from Miss O'Keefe, someone from the FDA. But you never heard her say that they shut down Peony Estates. Why? Because Peony Estates was following the law. Now, you also saw this exhibit that we showed. Now, this FDA personnel brought the wine that was so-called contaminated, filled with pesticides. She went to get it tested. And what do the facts show? What does the science show? That it didn't exceed the FDA maximums. They didn't violate the law. Now, you also heard back about improving Peony Estates, wanting to do the best. And you heard this from Blair Osborne, the wedding planner. Out of the 83 events she's hosted, not a single person had gotten sick at Peony Estates. Why? Because Peony Estates put the people over the profits. Now let's talk about those profits, because I didn't hear much of it. In fact, you heard about how Peony Estates spending time and money to train people, to pay people, to build these buildings, build a whole nother storage shed for those pesticides. You heard that they weren't making a profit. So where does this profit come in? Where is all this money that the plaintiff is saying Peony Estates is profiting from by putting it over the people? It's just not true. Now let's talk about those personnel. You heard about how there was knowledge, how there was training. And who did they bring? The plaintiff brought Danny Francasio, a competing winery. Now this competitive person, Danny Francasio, they actually left a tip for an investigative journalist. And why did they do this? Because they were the ones who cared about the profits more than the people. They were the ones who didn't provide help. They were the ones who tried to give this tip to shut down Peony Estates. But it didn't work, because you heard from the FDA person yourself. They never shut Peony Estates down. You also heard from that investigative journalist, Lonnie Paris. You heard about how they were sneaking around looking for something. Why? Because she didn't have a job. She cared about her profits, sure, a lot more than the people did. Now, I want to take a moment to tell a story. A very good friend told me once. Once upon a time, there was a king in a beautiful kingdom. And she was traveling through the forest when he saw an arrow stuck into every tree they passed. And in that arrow, it was stuck at the center of a bright red bullseye. And he said to himself, I must find the archer who has landed all of these bullseyes. They must be the greatest archer in the land. They searched far and wide until they saw an archer on a hill with a bow in her hand and a quiver of arrows. The king asked, are you the great archer who's landed a bullseye in every tree in my kingdom? And the archer replied, I am. Tell me, the king said, how do you shoot so true? The archer took an arrow from the quiver, notched it into his bow, and fired blindly into the forest. Follow me, the archer said, and led the king to the arrow in the tree. The archer then took out a paintbrush and a jar of bright red paint. He painted a bright red bullseye and 3 red rings. Now, members of the jury, this is exactly what the plaintiff today. They painted ring after ring over bits and pieces of evidence to try and tell you a story. And that's all that is. It's a story. I want to point out something you didn't hear today. You never heard Genesis Petrillo drink the wine. Not a single eyewitness told you what they consumed at Peony Estates. In just a moment, I'd like you to take a look at all the evidence that we've brought forth today. Look past the pain of tragedy and find the truth. Chip away at the red paint that the plaintiff has brought and find Peony Estates not liable. Thank you.
Any rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
May.
The defense wants you to believe that the plaintiff is in pain and looking for someone to blame. In reality, members of the jury, it's Peony Estates, the defendant, that is in shame and hoping to explain. The defense wants you to believe that Genesis Petrillo simply drank too much, that somehow all the pesticides in her stomach were her fault, that all the blatant symptoms of pesticide poisoning just weren't important. Instead of explaining all of this, they offered mere possibilities. In their desperation to explain, Peony Estates went so far as to blame the victim herself. Find Peony Estates liable.
Judge, you're muted.
Thank you. We're now going to submit our ballots. I'll ask everyone to stay on until everyone has submitted their ballots. If the scoring judges can message me after their ballots are submitted, and once both of the scoring judges have messaged me, we'll do our comments. Okay, it looks like both judges have submitted their ballots. If either one of the scoring judges wants to start their comments.
Hi, everyone. My name's Aden. I was one of your scoring judges this round. I want to say that I feel like you all did a really great job in being prepared and having the confidence to move forward with your objections and having a backup plan for when those didn't go through. And then the way that you all questioned the witnesses, I thought was incredible because it was really easy to follow, and the points like came through in their answers and their responses to your questions, which I appreciated. I did think that it was difficult at times to keep track of who you all were talking about because it wasn't consistent. You weren't using the same pronouns for the same people. And I just wanted you all to be aware of that moving forward, that whoever says it first in the beginning of the case, I feel like you should just stick with it the whole way through. So then people like me, it's easier to keep up, especially when we're seeing different faces on the screen all the time.
All right. As for me, I have some specific comments for almost everybody in my comment form. So once I submit that, you'll be able to see exactly what I think each of you could approve on. Didn't have a lot to say for everyone. One common thing I'd say is something I noticed, especially with the defense. I appreciate the attempt to control the witness and make sure that they're answering your question, but I'd be a little wary and caution against interrupting them, because it just it doesn't come across well to the jury. It, even though you might be right, they're explaining a little more than necessary. You remember, it's not just the information you present, the information you have, it's also how you present it. And sometimes it got to the point where it almost felt like you were bullying the witness, which is definitely not what you want the jury to think. But I will say, to the defense's credit, I also liked just how well and how discreetly you broke up your questions, kind of giving piece by piece, bit by bit, building up to your main point. I saw some plaintiff witnesses, plaintiff attorneys doing that as well. And I think overall, everyone's presentation was just phenomenal this round. I would have liked to hear a little more about the defense's theme woven through just a little more, especially in their case in chief. I know one witness mentioned the blaming, but that's it. And then on closing, you spend a lot of time, the defense spent a lot of time addressing the other side, but I'd like to hear a little more about what you had to offer, even though, you know, you don't have to provide any evidence necessarily. It is the plaintiff's burden. You spend most of it just attacking their side, the other side, without offering anything else for the jury to latch on to so much. But yeah, overall, very engaging, very fun to watch.
Okay, I'm going to premise this with I did not score this round. I was just the presiding judge. I've got some very specific comments. First of all, you don't necessarily have to ask permission every time. Once I have told you that you can call your next witness, you don't necessarily have to ask permission to begin. You call your witness. If we were in real court, they would then be sworn, and then you would just start. Hearsay objections, there were a couple of those. First of all, if the party opponent if it's a statement of a party opponent, which I think in this case was Harper, then it's going to come in, it's not hearsay. That includes if it's in written form, such as an email. So if it's an email from Harper to somebody else, that's going to get over a hearsay objection. If it's an email to Harper, that's when you would object to hearsay. I don't know if it's if this is true of all jurisdictions, and I don't know what the case law is for Midland, but normally just being an employee is not enough to be a party opponent. So normally it has to be the actual, either the party in their individual capacity or a representative of the business in order to be a party opponent. Don't use correct at the end of every leading question. It gets distracting. It's all right if you do it every once in a while, especially if you're having a hard time phrasing the leading question to make sure that they know it's a question. But when you're doing it at the end of every single sentence, it gets distracting, and then it also leads the witness to sometimes say, you're correct, over and over again, which is also distracting. Sometimes you forget what the question was because all you're hearing is the word correct on both sides. My last comment is relevancy objections. Usually, first of all, the bar to relevance is extremely low, so you're not going to win a relevancy objection very often. Second, if you actually believe that it's irrelevant, why are you objecting? Why not just let the other side waste their time? If you're going to make a relevancy objection, do it because you really don't want whatever information you think's about to come in, which is extremely rare. because normally if you don't want it to come in, it's because it's relevant. Does that make sense? Responding to a relevancy objection, I would always start with the bar is very low, and then go into why it's relevant. And that concludes all of my comments. Any other additional comments from either of the two scoring judges? Okay, I think that concludes the case, and I'm going to end the Zoom meeting.
Thank you.
Unless there's anything from any other person. Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you for judging.
You're welcome. Y'all take care.